a big thank you to everyone. And now I know how to see everyone. That's even more exciting. So I can slide in and out of people. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. And a special thank you to Sharon, who I think inadvertently kicked this off by writing a paper on this topic. So big thank you to Sharon. Because without her we wouldn't be here, and to all the other speakers we've got today. And I suppose just by way of introduction, I think, well, I know that none of us really have ever experienced a global crisis of this nature in our lifetime. And obviously with something so large, we're needing to draw on different types of leadership to help us through this time. So that's what we're going to be exploring this morning in the webinar. We've got some presentations, and we're also very sure that all of you will have your own experiences to share. So we want it to be a sort of knowledge learning exchange. So that's the way we've designed it in the way that we have. So I'm going to hand over to Ian, who's going to just talk you through the plan for the day. But roughly, before I do that, these objectives that have now just come up on screen, I won't read them. This is really basically what we're going to be covering. We're going to be drawing on a value-based approach to dealing with change and other different ways that we can learn and feed ourselves during this period of change. So Ian, do you want to just explain about the plan?
Yeah, great. So welcome everybody. Really great that people could join us today. We're going to try to finish by 1:30. We've got first of all Sharon, who's going to speak, and Sharon and Lynn are both going to speak for about 5 minutes, giving, if you like, a framing piece to the whole session. So Sharon will talk, bringing on sort of through wisdom from different things that she feels is very relevant to this topic, which aligns with the paper that's being circulated with it. And then Lynn is going to particularly talk in terms of trying to bring more soul to this whole topic and thinking around issues of values and culture, and particularly embedding it very strongly in that area. Hardy and Shivani are going to give particular perspectives from different organizations. So Hardy's going to talk about the culture of the commitment and how that's being lived at this COVID-19 time. So you'll see a particular slide which Hardy will talk to. And then Shivani's going to give a perspective of her work in India. Then we're going to go into the discussion in the breakout rooms. And in the breakout rooms, we'll have quite small groups deliberately so that we can sort of share experiences, apply the learning that we've got from the 4 people beforehand. And we should have a good half an hour for that. And then when we come back to the main group, we'll only be hearing, we have 6 facilitators, but we'll only be hearing 1 or 2 key insights. And then we'll go through just for an overarching reflection or 2 from Sharon. But also, before Lorna closes, we're really, really lucky that Ben Oldroyd, a graphic artist who is an advisor of Capital Horizons, is doing a live drawing of this as we're going through the whole process, and he'll be able to show us that at the end. So that's really something to look forward to, and then we'll close. So thank you very much. So if that's okay, over to you, Rosie. You're just going to talk through the sort of nuts and bolts of the process.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to give a few practicalities. So if people could try and keep themselves on mute for the first sort of bit, but then you'll obviously have an opportunity to talk when we're in the breakout rooms. We really want to hear from everyone today. So if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat. But if they can, ideally keep them until we have the group discussion, because we'll have facilitators that will be able to answer your questions then. I'm already recording this, if that's okay with everyone, but when we go into the group discussions, we won't record that, so you can then feel free to say anything you like, but then we'll be able to share the recording with everyone afterwards. Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to keep to time, and I don't think I've got much else to say. If you've got any questions or anything goes a bit wrong with the technology, then just get in touch with me via the chat. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Sharon to start us off.
Thank you, Rosie. Lovely to see everybody. Great turnout today, so thank you. So we grappled with the title of today, but we thought that leading our way through change in the coronavirus world might be a good way to describe some of the things that we're trying to think about. And leading as in, we're all leaders. So I'm not just thinking about top leaders. Rosie, if we could have the first slide. Thank you. So you probably, some of you will have heard me talk about VUCA before. We've been thinking about the VUCA world for some time now, and how volatile, uncertain and complex and ambiguous the world is becoming. But nobody imagined the uncertainty and ambiguity that would hit us this year in 2020 with the coronavirus. And I think everything is even more unpredictable than it even was before, if that's possible. Society seems to be changing, the economy is changing, even the environment is changing. So we as leaders are all having to think about how we deal with both the positives and the negatives. And of course, there are many pressures and so many heartaches for us to deal with. But of course, there's also some elements of hope. For example, there's some of the things that we might discuss. How do we get the most out of working from home? How do we build our connections, use teamwork? How do we help people to deal with threats to their livelihoods and their workforces, but also how do we help organizations, our own organizations and others to survive, and how do we protect our health? And some of the reasons for hope, well, this has been a huge rise in communityship, solidarity, amazing acts of kindness that we've been seeing over the last month or two, and also some evidence that CO2 emissions are reducing dramatically more than ever before. And we're actually all finding new ways of working like we are today. So what we want to do is to talk about how we can build on that and learn from some of these unforeseen events that are happening. Rosie, I'd like to move on to the next slide. Thank you. So how do we respond? And at Capital Horizons, values are very much at the heart of everything that we do. We believe that a values-based approach is going to give us the roots or a sense of direction. And Lynn will talk about soul, how we work, how we bring soul into our activities. In the article that I wrote, I'll give you full references on this and the next slide, but Kathleen O'Connor done a very nice video as part of a webinar from London Business School. She talks first and foremost about compassion, being compassionate as leaders, but also stable. And I think she doesn't mean fixed and rigid. She means stable in the sense that, you know, we bring our own calm to every situation. Hopeful without being overly optimistic so that we're not trusted. So we have to be trustworthy with the people that we work with. And then, of course, communication, it's much different how we communicate today, but very important that we do communicate in different ways, frequently, but realistically, and hopeful again. How do we bring hope, but also realism into our conversations? And finally, she talks about helping people to draw on their own autonomy as well as belonging. So on the one hand, we want people to have wings to fly and do the things that they need to do, but also to feel that they're part of something greater. And how do we actually enable people to grow new competencies? So some of the conversations that we'd like to have today would be, how are we doing this with the people around us, the teams or the colleagues or the partners, and how could we do this more? My final slide, thank you, was from a little summary of an article that McKinsey's have produced. And again, the reference is in the article if you want to have a look at it. But I thought, again, rather similar ideas, but very nicely put together, I think. So firstly, one of the things that McKinsey's are saying is we do have to first and foremost focus on well-being. and the people's lives. You know, we're all distant from each other, and yet we don't know what happens behind the screen of all the individuals that we see on Zoom and elsewhere. So understanding what people's needs are in terms of their lives, their families, their well-being, really important that we find ways to do that, to connect with people on a deeper level. They also suggest that we can't do everything, so we do need to develop a network of teams. And I think this is an idea that we've been grappling with even before the coronavirus situation, but now more than ever, how do we build those networks of teams who can collaborate, and how do we ensure transparency through that? But one of the ways that we can connect those teams would be how people unite behind a clear purpose. And finally, McKinsey's also talking about a calmness, so as in the previous slide, a stability, deliberate calm, but at the same time bounded optimism, not over optimism, but an optimism that's realistic and bounded. And for us, I think a nice bit of guidance was their idea of leaders pausing, assessing, anticipating, and then acting. So if we feel overwhelmed by the situation, those 4 steps, an iterative 4 steps, I think can be very helpful. And thoughtful, frequent communication, as in the previous slide. How do we do that? How do we do that more and more? We can never over communicate. So I think that some of those ideas are some of the things that we could talk about in terms of how we're acting as leaders in our day-to-day lives today, our online day-to-day lives. But I'd like to hand over now to Lynn to talk a little bit more about what that means for individual leaders and the soul of the work that leaders do.
Thank you, Sharon. That's fantastic. So what I want to do this morning is look at what current leaders are doing, national leaders. I've looked at 7 national leaders and what's been written to date about what they're doing successfully. And those leaders are from Germany, New Zealand, Belgium, Finland, Iceland, Denmark. I've also looked at Taiwan, California, Australia, and Singapore. And I've looked at it through the Leaderful Way lens. Next slide. Through the Leaderful Way lens, which is of synchronous, service, and soul. And I've mapped the things that they've been doing and that has been written. So let's look. So what I'm going to do is for each soul, service, and synchronous, explain what leaders have been doing successfully, and then a slide of questions for each of you to take away. They may be useful today, but they may be more useful for you to take away. So how have successful leaders been leading during the coronavirus from a soul point of view? And I did this independently of Sharon, but there are so many crossovers. The first thing is they've remained calm and clear, and they faced difficult truths early on. They haven't avoided them, and they've not avoided the deep suffering. They've engaged through meaning making and with the deep suffering and tragedy. They've also never claimed to be in control, which is quite interesting, but they've done what's called dynamic steering. They're not saying they're not fully engaged with it and doing everything they can, but they're not pretending that they can actually solve this in a heroic, individualistic way. They show genuine empathy and care, and no blame or self-aggrandizement games, which we certainly have seen some national leaders do. So what are the kind of questions you may want to think about for yourself in terms of your soulfulness? I'm not going to read them all out, but the one that I want to focus on is, do you know your values and soul depths? Do you know your still point? T.S. Eliot's famous quote about finding their calmness is from their still point and what really matters to you. And this is what is enabling them to stay resilient. So let's look at service. So what have they been doing? Society, this is a quote from one of the articles, society is at the heart of everything they're doing, not ego or self-interest and trouble at the other end of that spectrum. Something that's really important is they've acted, I'm speaking a lot about their state of being, but they've absolutely decisively introduced impactful measures early on, and they've listened to the science. There's total transparency. They've built trust and they feel trustworthy. And that's something that they had before and is really important to them now. Continual dialogue, conversation, and information, and encourage engagement, not compliance, not just compliance, but because of that, people are actually doing what's important. So what kind of questions might you want to look at? How do your values and soul call you to serve at this time to make an authentic impact? And do people really trust you? Are you trustworthy? Because this is the kind of time in a crisis where that comes through or not, and staying true to your deep values. The New Zealand leader, Arden, her slogan is be strong, be kind. She's really displaying her values really up front. So let's look at synchronous. Synchronous means everything happening at the same time. So although I'm looking at national leaders here, I think what's important is that these leaders have seen the whole interconnected picture system, their national system, and have worked within that. So in terms of supply chain, fast supply chain, in terms of linking things together. They've inspired engagement and teamwork rather than compliance. They see that everybody is involved. They've also called on everybody to be leaderful and to do their part. So it's not individualistic leadership now, we're all in this together. They've encouraged innovative public, private and other kinds of partnerships, and they've effectively using social media technology. And a last set of questions that you might want to think of is, how do you step into your own leaderful, unique way, seeped in your values, and be a conscious part of the whole? I want to close with a quote from Margaret Wheatley, which I think is very suitable for this times. She said this a while ago, it's possible for leaders to use their power, influence, insight and compassion to get us back to creating conditions for our basic human qualities of generosity, contribution, community and love, and that it is possible. And I think those leaders are arising now. And I want you to think about, where are you a leader of this kind? How can you be leaderful? And how can you call and engage with others, whatever your sphere of influence is, whether it's your home, your organization, a national country or whatever. And I'll just end with the slide. If you're interested in the Leaderful Way, it's a thought paper from Kepler Horizon that looks at these studies, and there's lots more information on that. So I'll just leave you with enthusiasm and encouragement to be the leader you're meant to be at this time of crisis. Thank you. And I'll hand over to Hardy.
Thanks, Lynn. Hi everyone, my name's Hardy. I'm from The Commitment, which is a small project housed by Kepler Horizons, and we're dedicated to speeding up government action for a healthy planet. And the way that works is people make personal commitments to vote with a healthy planet at the core of their decision, and a few other things that sort of empower the project. But an exercise that we did towards the end of last year, but has become really relevant, and I think it's been structured very well because it links very clearly to the conversations of synchronicity and stuff that Sharon and Lynn have been talking about. And so with the Kepler team, we did an exercise where we were sent into groups, and we were told to choose animals and come up with characteristics that those animals have. And one sort of the group we went with was spinner dolphins, and this was the purpose of this was to come up with a culture and some mantras to stand by, so that when times do get difficult, or when in need, we have something to turn to that we can all respond to and use in a sort of synchronous way. So after much deliberation and much conversation and a great, really interactive exercise, we came up with these 5 characteristics that we felt suited our organization and also linked to our chosen animal, which was the spinner dolphin. So we've got joyful, ambitious, whole, excellent, and kind, with a really sensical mnemonic, JAWEC. At the moment, these have become extremely relevant in the way we work. And I guess while strategy is the sort of ever-evolving practical nuts and bolts of how an organization functions, this more personal, sort of consistent identity is what becomes really important at times like this. So I thought I'd talk a bit about how we use each of these. And I guess we'll go in the order of the mnemonic. So joyful, ambitious, and whole. No, joyful, whole, and kind are the 3 that have fused together during this time, because they're the ones that we need to focus on most when we're all struggling in the current situation. So examples of how we've been putting these into play is starting meetings by checking in on each other extremely carefully and making sure we give the time to maybe just talk about what we've been watching on Netflix for 5 minutes, or have a very sort of friendly and personal discussion to make sure that we're all looking after each other and that we're not just diving straight into what we're doing. We're making sure that we're all on the same page and that we can look after those who are maybe having a more difficult time than others. But the ambitious and excellent come through within this dynamic, as we don't lose what we're doing. We don't lose our targets. We don't lose our goals. We react to this situation in an ambitious way. And excellent, it says here that we're thorough, rigorous, and high quality in our approach. We don't sacrifice that, though we spend extra time in looking after each other and being joyful and being whole and being kind to each other. That allows us to maintain our ambitions and our excellence in the work we produce. And it's the way that these all intermingle, like a group of spinner dolphins. It's worth watching a pod on YouTube and seeing how they interact. We really felt it resonated strongly with how we work. So I guess the reason I've come here to present this is an idea of how you can have that basis of how to function, how to react to each other, and how to interact with each other during a time when stability and structure might be falling apart. And yeah, I think that's all I really have to say on that. It's just a nice sort of addition to the previous. And I'll pass over to Shivani.
Hi, everyone. So I'm based in Udaipur, a small town in India, and I'm running a small team of 16 people focused on corporate volunteering programs for businesses so that everyone becomes a lifelong learner and finds ways to contribute to the community. And Capital has been working with us on leadership development, on team development. And it's been, I think, an interesting time for everyone, but something that's really stood out to me is in a crisis like this, which no one's seen, your values and your culture are really, really tested. But this is also the time where, at least for us at Dharohar, we're seeing the payoff, where I really feel like we're reaping the dividends of the work we put in over the last 3 or 4 years to make the team feel incredibly cared for and build that sense that everyone cares deeply about each other and about the work we're doing. A really simple example of this is we talk a lot about the ideas of wabi-sabi and experimentation and it being okay to fail, and kind of we're making a lot of things up as we go, and that's day to day for us. So then when we had to switch to working from home and people not being comfortable online and lots of people having to learn very new things, there was a little bit of that habit, which just allowed people to say, okay, we're going to make it up as we go. We're used to making it up, and it's okay if it's not perfect. And I think that's really helped us. The 2 big things that I've been thinking about as a leader of an organization are this taking care of well-being, and what does well-being look like for different people in this time. And then the second piece, which I think is deeply connected, is how can we still retain a sense of meaning, the ability to add value. And for people to know that they still have agency and to feel that, because there are so many things which are just uncertain and we don't know about them. But when we feel like there is something we can do to contribute, or we can do to make our lives or other people's lives better, that really sustains the well-being. And as we've been trying to work on that, one of my reflections is that it's in the small things and the tiny shifts you make that we're really seeing results. So something as simple as having a structured call twice a day, which is mandatory to attend, but being okay if people don't make it. That gives folks who are living completely alone in a single room sort of apartment a way of connecting without feeling like they're being a burden, but equally someone who's got, 3 kids at home and is managing their in-laws and all of that, the flexibility to say, I can say no and push back, and no one's going to feel badly about this. The other part of what Sharon was saying that really resonated, and this is something that I think we need to work on, is communicating with the right level of optimism. I don't know if many of you are familiar with the Stockdale paradox story that Jim Collins shares, but he talks about being a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And he said that the people who survived were neither the pessimists or the optimists, because the optimists said, we'll be out by Easter, we'll be out by Christmas. And after a point, just the disappointment of never getting there broke them down. So helping people having to have that sense that it's going to be okay at some point, and we will find a new normal and things will get better. But the lockdown didn't open the last time it was supposed to. I'm not certain it's going to open on the 3rd of May for us. How do we build that resilience and that hope in the team that I don't know when it's going to be fine, but at some point it will be? And then the other big question that I have is, how do leaders at this time sustain and take care of themselves whilst they're also looking to take care of the rest of their teams? And just learning to be gentle with yourself, because if you're not being gentle with yourself and giving yourself the time, actually your team doesn't do that either, because they're looking far more at what you're doing than at what you're saying. So I can say it's okay if you're less efficient as much as I like till I'm blue in the face, but if that's not reflected in my actions, that's not really what's going forward. So anyways, those were my few thoughts.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think, Rosie, have you got a slide to pull up now? So we're just going to go into the group work now. So we will still come out to the group work at 1 o'clock. Just in the group work, I think as Lynn said, a lot of the research, for instance, that she said overlapped with some of Sharon's points, and then Hardy's brought that to life in a way through a real example, and then Shivani again through her own experiences has brought to life many key points like well-being and so on. But now's the opportunity for people to discuss it in small groups. We deliberately made them small, so please just give yourselves a little time to introduce yourself, discuss about what's been said, and share any sort of stories, experiences and learning about how you've responded and adapted to the changing circumstances around you. And then the facilitators will kind of just feedback just 1 or 2 key points, 1 or 2 insights rather from the discussion. And then we'll go towards the end and have Ben's creative look at how this whole thing has worked from his perspective. So okay then, so Rosie, can you put us into groups, please?
Yeah.
Back in the room.
Yeah.
I think so.
So shall I go first and feedback from our group? And yeah, okay. So in our group, we felt that we wanted to feedback that we really resonated with the message of hope, which was one of the 4 points that Sharon presented around Kathleen O'Connor's words of stability, hope, trustworthiness, and compassion. But particularly an example in our group was about the importance early on of making that decision early on, like Lynn said. There's some difficult decisions that had to be made within an organization. And the importance, I suppose, of bounded optimism really came through in terms of being hope, being clear about what that meant. So that was 1 point. The second point was about well-being. And we really felt that that was a sort of an important insight insofar as that in one form or another was spoken about by all the 4 people at the beginning, and it felt like perhaps really, really important, and the sort of exploration of well-being and how that was done in different organizations. Shivani gave some great examples, but I think in our work, in our little group, we all came forward with sort of the importance of maybe sometimes the you know, the personal, professional, almost impossible to separate, and therefore people having to bring their whole selves, like Hardy was sort of saying, one of the spinning dolphins, if you like. So the importance of exploring well-being, and almost productivity having to be put on the back burner sometimes, and just recognizing, well, actually, you know, we just have to take care of the team, take care of ourselves. And then the third area about soul, really resonating with Lynn's whole presentation there, and particularly as one person put it, really this prevents an opportunity for reflection to really get to the root of what's most important for us as people, maybe for communities, for organizations, and for society as a whole. And different examples were given in that regard. So that's really what came through in our group. Maybe I'll hand the baton over to Peter, and then maybe Peter could hand it over to someone else.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, no, we had a great discussion, and I think there were 3 points that came out really strongly for me. One was Penny's point about the type of leaders who are really being of greatest value at present are those who are strong and kind. So reflecting very much what Sharon and Lynn were bringing to us, that kindness element, which we don't traditionally associate with macho archetypical leaders, has become really important in the present context. And the importance there of continuing that insight as we emerge from this pandemic. So hoping that's a lasting change. And that brings me to the second point, which is all about how do we capture the learning that we're all gaining through this exceptional opportunity, this exceptional process. And amidst the tragedy, we are learning a great deal. And I think the consensus view in our group was that's not mainly about writing long reports. A lot of that is about having the right conversations and reflecting on them yourself. And William gave a beautiful example of the buddy system you have between Capital Horizon staff and the commitment staff, and how those conversations are very fruitful. And then the third point that came out strongly from several people, but Fiona and Shivani particularly drew us to it, was the way this present situation makes it safe to express our full humanity, to be fully ourselves, to bring our whole self into work. And that's hugely liberating, but it's also very effective in terms of teamwork, because it brings all of us into the system rather than just a little bit of us. There's a great discussion, and I imagine we're going to be writing these up, so we'll capture some of the things I haven't mentioned. Right, now let me hand over to Rosie.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I think a quote that summed up our group quite well was the Henry Mintzberg quote, which Sharon included in her paper, which is, when the world is predictable, you need smart people, but when the world is unpredictable, you need adaptable people. And I think that was one of the main points in our group, that the organisations that were quickest to adapt or had put themselves in a position beforehand where they were able to sort of swiftly change and mould their approach, they actually have probably benefited the most in this scenario. So organisations, we had an example of an organisation that had sort of put in this IT system where people could check in and out laptops and that sort of thing, and that's now really helped with working from home. And one of the participants in our group is a funder, so any of the organisations that were quite quickly able to ask for funding, they were able to provide the funding, and actually it was the people that took much longer to ask for money that then at that point, you know, there was a lot of competition for that money. So I think that sort of sums up the conversation. I will pass it over to Dan.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, very rich conversation from my group. I think the points I want to share with you are John highlighted, and it was endorsed by others, keeping society at heart. You know, that's absolutely vital going forward. And Beth also said this in a different way, in that we've got to move away from all of it, putting each other in silos. Society is not silos. We're a community, a global community, and society is at that heart. And if we don't say he's got to do that, or she's got to do that, or they should do this, we're all together, and we've got to keep that society at heart. So that was resonated. There was a lot of discussion about how the economy always dominates the agenda, and trying to get this balance of, focus on social and the environment, and get that balance is absolutely vital. And Gareth and I think it was John really liked the point that Sharon made, I think, about leaders need to pause, then assess, then anticipate, and then act. And that's a really helpful thing to remember when you're operating in challenging times. But the conversation was very rich. There was a sort of a statement about appreciating all the direct line workers and how they should be far more valued in the future. And Gareth then added to that, really, and there's an awful lot of not so direct and obvious people that are doing amazing things in this time, and then they also need to be recognised and thanked for what they've done. So I will pass over to Lorna.
Maybe we'll go to Sharon next. You there, Sharon?
Here we are. Sorry. Okay. Yes, well, again, another very rich conversation, some wonderful learning between those people who in the group who are managing an organization, leading an organization or a group of people, and those who are a part of an organization or multiple organizations. One of the things that I thought was very revealing in Cecilia's organization was the first thing that she did was make sure that the staff felt secure, that they would, despite the financial challenge and crisis, that they would have steady income. And so the honesty and trust that was established at that point, which must have been very hard. And as she said, keeping a cool head was really critical there. Another learning was that in a crisis, you see the partners that you work with, you discover which have really deep rooted values that match your organization, and those who abandon their values in a crisis. And that's given her a great learning in terms of going forward as to who she wants to work with in the future. I thought that was also very revealing and very useful. From Minka, we learned something about how to establish that sense of a structure for the day, checking in the morning, checking in the evening, at the end of the day, making sure that people know what each other are doing. It's very hard to work in a vacuum on your own if nobody knows what the contribution that you're making. So people feeling their contribution and revealing their contribution was felt to be very important. And then working with the women in the safe houses, establishing community Zooms, so that actually focusing on people's well-being at this time, so that they can learn some new skills, baking and whatever. So again, very important, I think about your own staff and what how they feel structured to the day, but also think about the people that you're serving in society. And so that was extremely useful. And one quote from Minka, that this has brought us closer together. So whilst they're working electronically, they feel more close together, which is fascinating, I think, that we can do that. And then other insights from Patrick and Annie, that actually some leaders seem to be seizing opportunities and being quite flexible and creative, and actually making a really good use of this challenge and this challenging situation. Others are much more passive and waiting for it to pass. So actually seizing opportunity is really important. And in terms of the positives that are coming out, one of the things that came out was the appreciation of the community sector, and civil society has increased dramatically in the last few weeks. So how do we sustain that feeling and that recognition that we're all giving now to those who actually lead and manage us through the crisis? So that's it in a nutshell. There was much more, so thank you to the group. It was a great conversation.
Shall I go next? Shall I go now?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so we had a very amazing conversation, and it's hard to distill, but I think fundamentally there were two chunky bits of discussion. One was about messaging and the way we portray ourselves in public and in private, and how they were different at the moment, with the inner space being much more about building your resilience, about around suffering and loss, and those spaces weren't necessarily shared in a public realm. And what one of the group described furlough, some of equally distributed across the organisation, but it was seen as a God-sent reboot. And that kind of summed it up in terms of a time to pause and really go to that inner self and look at, well, what is it, what's meaningful to me, what is it that I want? And it felt like through all this crisis, people are being thrown almost back on themselves, asking those fundamental questions that we're usually so busy getting on with our lives, we forget to ask ourselves the question about, you know, who are we or what do we want? So, and what matters to me now, and that's very much connected with the who am I. And again, it's like I think both Sharon and Lynn mentioned this, that in times of crisis, you know, we're thrown back on our values as a thing that are a constant sort of guiding star. So the positivity in that really came through. And personal well-being being a big one, that, you know, really without it being egocentric, we have to look after ourselves before we can look after anyone else. So our personal well-being is something which is brought much more to the fore, because we are operating more in a sort of community-ship realm that you can only do if you're fit for purpose.
Great, thank you. Sharon, do you have any last comments before we go over to Ben?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think we heard almost the same things resonating across all of the groups, and that sense of pausing and reflecting, that sense of building trust that has been happening in so many domains, that sense of creating hope and positivity that's been so important for leaders, helping people to get through this crisis. The resilience that people are displaying at this very difficult time is astonishing. And I think at the heart of all of that, therefore, you know, people are talking values. People are talking about values more than they've ever talked before. So I think that we do have some patterns, and I think most surprising for me, I think, is how many positives are coming out of this situation. However awful and tragic this situation is, there's so much that we're learning about how to lead in a positive way and in a caring way, and a focus on well-being of people. So I think it's been really very thought-provoking for me, and hopefully for all of you, to think about what we can do when we have to.
Thank you very much. Lovely. Ben, are you ready for us?
Sure. Hey, everyone. So I've been furiously drawing as people are talking. I don't know if you are able to see my little profile picture, but it's actually an indication of some of the work that I've been doing as people have been drawing. I don't know if I'm able to share my screen. Oh, perfect. There you go. Look at that.
All right.
So I work with CAPA for a number of different things, but what I've been doing here is visually capturing conversations. So this was from the opening discussion this morning, where, and if I replay the video, I don't know if it's going to work. No, it's not working right now. But the, oh, it is working. There you go. So this is, as people talk, I've kind of been drawing, and all of these materials are going to be shared after this session, I'm pulling together, it's called a Sway website where all of this will be hosted. Also some of the documentation, some of the papers that Sharon wrote and Lynn referenced, all of that I'll hopefully build into there this afternoon. And I will send a link out to Ian and Rosie and the team to share with the wider group, basically. So this is kind of what I do for a living, but it's also partly what I do in conjunction with CAPLA in my role as an advisor. So that's kind of it. I don't know, Rosie, if it's worth throwing up the draft of the website or if it's worth leaving that as a surprise for people for later.
Let's inspire people later. I'm just loving watching this. It's so clever. Okay. Thank you so much. You've done a really great job.
Thanks.
Thank you. So do we have any final feedback or comments? I know Lorna's gonna say a few words.
Yeah, I'm sort of I keep going in and out of contact. My Wi-Fi is going nuts, I think, with so many people on it. So I'm going to say it rather hurriedly in case I get cut off. But I would just like to say such a big thank you to so many people coming and participating in this webinar. I love the drawing that that Ben's done. I can't wait to see that, and that's really exciting. And I can already see you've captured things in such a brilliant way. And we have recorded it, as Rosie said, so you have an opportunity to do a little review and watch it again if you want to. Our next webinar is on June the 9th, and we haven't finalised the topic yet, but be assured you will get lots of warnings and invitations. So please come along. It really is great to see so many of our advisors, clients, former, past, present, future with us. So I just want to really appreciate you all, and in particular Ben and Shivani and Hardy and Lynn and Sharon for presenting so well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Great, I think we'll end it there. Have a lovely day, everyone, or evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you.
Okay, bye.
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 Thanks, everyone.